Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Haraf, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Baruch Hashem.
So we're starting in the second halacha bet. In the tour, it says halash isa b'yom tov shel pesach b'makom she'en kohen. So if he needs a dough on Yom Tov of Passover, and there's no kohen there, lo ikra lechala shem ad shete'afeh. So he says you shouldn't call the name of chala until it's baked. Shem ikra la Shem lo yehe rashai lafota. Because once you call it chala, you can't bake it anymore. Why is that? Kevan she'en kan mi she'rawiya lo. Because there's nobody here who's fitting for that, to eat it. Ve'im yanicha kach tachamitz. And if he just leaves it like that, it'll get leavened. Ve'no rashai lesorfa. Oh, so he says you can't burn it. That's the thing, right? Usually what we do is we burn the chala. But here he can't do it. Why is that? Because you can't burn on Yom Tov. This is the problem. You can't burn it on Yom Tov. So therefore he says, what's the solution? Don't call it chala until after the baking. And then what he's going to do is he's going to combine all the loaves in a basket. And he's going to separate one on the whole thing, the whole bunch. And if you forgot, right, then called it already the challah before the baking, yatilena letzonen. So he says what you should do is put it right in cold water. And this way it won't leaven. Interesting. But if there's a kohen child there in that area, that he never saw keri in his life, right? What is keri? Seminal emission. Or afilu gadol shera'a keri. Or let's say if you have a big kohen, right, that did see keri, but taval lekario, but he already immersed in the mikveh, right? He purified himself. Yachol likot la'Hashem. So then he can do that. He can call it chala. Because it's fitting for him, this kohen. Berov, by way of nullifying it in the majority. And then he's going to eat it in his impure time, when he's impure. So it says the second kohen, the chala, which is eaten by the kohen, he's going to separate it and bake it, just like with other Yemot HaShana, like the other times of the year. Shemuter the kohen leochla, the kohen is allowed to eat it. Afilu lebada, even by itself, bimeh tumato, in his impure time. V'yesh me'ageonim shkatvu. There are some geonim who wrote she'af chala. Okay, maybe we should see Bet Yosef here. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this. Where is the source for that? Mishnah bepek elu ovrin, right? It's a Mishnah. Elu ovrin. Kitzad mefreshin chala betuma b'yom tov. How do you separate chala in impurity on Yom Tov? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo tikra la Hashem ad sheteafeh. So Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, what do? Don't call it challah until after the baking. This way you won't have a problem. Ben Betera Omer, this rabbi says, tatil letzonin, right? Put it in cold water. Amar, as we said, right? Then it won't leaven. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, says this rabbi, lo ze chametz shenu mitzuvin alav. So says this is not the kind of chametz that were commanded upon the bali ra'eh or bali matzeh, right? Regarding the prohibition of chametz, not to see it, not to have it. Ela miprisha umenichata ad ha'erev. So what you do is, he says, you separate it and you leave it until the evening, until Yom Tov goes out, right? And if it became leavened, okay, so be it, right? As he said, "V'pasku poskim halacha k'Rabbi Eliezer." So he says, "Poskim paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar lo tikra laShem ad sheteafeh." He says, right, that you shouldn't call it challah until it gets baked. The Katav Rosh says the Rosh. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua lo plige. It says it seems like these two rabbis, right, are not arguing Ben Betera on Ben Betera. The lo mistaber the plige behai svara. So it's because it doesn't make sense they're arguing about this claim, this theory. Im machametzet betoch hamayim, that if right it gets leavened in the water. Ela de Rabbi Eliezer ashmuinan de muzhar al chimutz chala. Rather, he says Rabbi Eliezer is coming to teach you that we are warned, right, not to refrain from the challah becoming leavened, right, to prevent that. But Rabbi Yoshua, Sabar Deno Muzhar, and Rabbi Yoshua holds that we're not commanded about that. So meaning what? We don't care, let it, so be it, as we said, right? It happened, it happened. Omnam, Behab Palig Rabbi Eliezer Ben Betera. But he says, this is what Rabbi Eliezer and Ben Betera are arguing about. The Savar, the Tov Yoter Sheloi Karel Hashem. He holds, right, that it's better not to call it challah until you bake it. Ulai lo yizaher yafeh be'atalata betzonen. Why is that? Because maybe, he won't be so careful when he puts it in cold water. In other words, he won't do it the right way. And this way we're concerned, right, that it'll get leavened. Okay. But this is if it happened already that he called it, challah before the baking. Haya omer Rabbeinu Tam would say, "Shetitelena lepsonen." What should he do? Right, as we said, right, put it into cold water. That's also the rabbi. This rabbi says the same thing. So, in other words, b'diavad, if you did do it by mistake, whatever, put it in cold water. Okay. So then he goes on bit Yosef. But in a place where you have like a child who's a kohen, right? Lo tikra laShem, regarding that which we learned in the Mishnah, that you shouldn't call it challah until it gets baked. Katav arif, all right, it says the rif there, hanemile beret Israel. That's only in Eretz Israel. The challah deoraita. Why? Because over there the challah is from the Torah. By the way, just to point it out, right, that today, even in Eretz Israel, the challah is not from the Torah. So he's talking about, when the temple stood, and the Jews were on their land, right? Talking about that period, not what we have today, right? Not exactly that. We're not exactly there yet. We're getting there, but we still have a ways to go. Right? So yeah. So he says, right, that since it's challah, which is impure, it's not fit to eat klal at all. Right? Nobody can eat impure challah, right? Whether it's a big guy or a small guy, doesn't matter. Child, adult, whatever. So he says, and since On Yom Tov, we're not allowed to bake something which is not going to be used for eating, right, or whatever, or for some kind of a right physical need. V'gam asur lisrof kodashim b'Yom Tov, and also you're not allowed to burn holy things on Yom Tov, right? And this is holy. Challah is holy. Alright, so therefore that's why he needed to say he shouldn't call it right L'Shem to call it challah ad shetafeh until it's baked. Dechevan de lo nikra la Shem, because since he didn't call it the yet challah, Shem challah adain lo nitkadesha, still hasn't become sanctified. Bechol rifta verifta de afiyeh amrinan ha hi dechazia leachila, right? And therefore we say, right, that each loaf of bread that you're baking, it's fit for eating, right? Now they're all fit for eating, right? So they're all good. Okay. Aval chalat chutz laaretz demederabanani. But he says when it comes to challah of the diaspora, which is only rabbinical, lo tzricha velo midi, right? You don't have to do nothing there. Ela korel Hashem. So what do? But you call it challah, you designate it. Ve'ape la lechatchila, and you can bake it right away. Ve'achi la kohen katan. So what do? Right, the kohen katan will eat it, the child. Tamar Shemuel, says Shemuel, en chalat chutza laaretz asura ela. So he says, right, that the challah of the diaspora is only forbidden to who? Lemi shetumah yotzea migufo. Somebody that the tumah, the impurity comes out of his body. In other words, it's like gushing out right now as we speak. Currently, right? Okay. Be'ish, when it comes to a man, ad she'yira'eh keri. So that means that for the man, it's like until he actually sees the seminal emission. Uvisha ad she'teheh nida. And for the woman, right, it's until she actually sees, the blood of nida. Ve'arosh katav od. Says the Rosh, ve'afal im yesh kohen gadol she'achol litbol. Even if it was a kohen gadol, right, the high priest that was able to immerse. Nireh de mutar le'afota. Right, I'm sorry, I didn't say it right. Not the high priest. Oh boy. No. It doesn't mean high priest over here. What it means is that he's an adult Kohen. Okay, sorry about that. So it's the same terminology. That's why I mistook it. Mistaken, right? Okay. So right She'achol etbol nireh. So he's able to the inverse. Nireh de mutar le'afota. So he says, therefore, if he's able to immerse, it seems like you're allowed to bake it, right? No problem. Okay, good. So because it's fitting for him. Even though that the impurity is coming out of his body. Migufo lo chamir batar the tavil tefe mitame met. So he says after he immerses, we're not right. It's not more stringent than the one who has the impurity of the dead. The masi katam that concludes over there, the ochel betruma chutz haaretz, he can eat the truma of the diaspora. But the afilu belo tevila chazia. This is also right, even without immersion, it's fitting for him. Lebal keri, right? For who? For one who has an emission, alidei bitul, by way of nullification. As we said over there, Rabba mevatel bimet tumato at kanasha, right? So Rabba, what he would do is, right, when he was impure, he would nullify it, and this way it would be allowed for him to eat. Right? That's what it says also, this book, Perek Gimel Milchot Yom Tov, right there. But the Ran katav, she'eshivo al arif, she'eshivo al arif shekatav, ve'ele kohen katan, avid le k'Rabbi Eliezer. So, that they answered, right? They refuted the Rif that he wrote that if there's no Kohen Katan, we do like Rabbi Eliezer, vafilu leka Kohen Katan, even if you don't have Kohen Katan, Matza lemecha la Kohen Gadol. So then an adult Kohen can eat it, right? What does that mean? He'll immerse for his right impurity and he'll eat. But lav kushia and it says there's not really any question there. There's not any problem. Tehashta mia la chaziale, because he says right now it's not fitting for him at this point, right? At this juncture, it's not. Vechi tema deha matze tabil leta So he says, and if you're going to tell me that he's able to immerse in the mikveh, so he says, not so. It says, because we don't say, we don't deal with hypotheticals. That's what he's saying, right? Hypothetically, yes, it could be possible, but right now the case is not so. So, don't talk to me about hypothetical. Okay, good. שלא מן הועיל במחוסר מעשה, ואפשר עוד שאינו מותר בתרומת חוצה לארץ בתפילה לבד. So it says also, it says possible that the truma of chutz laaretz is not really permitted, only with immersion, below ha'erev shemesh, without also the sun setting as well. ומיהו עוד אחרית יש ולא רצה הריף לגלותה, but he says, however, there is also another reason, and the Rif didn't want to reveal it. Because we say in Bechorot, chalat chutz laaretz mevatla berov. So he says the chalav of the diaspora, you can nullify it also in the majority as well. You can, just like we said about kitniot, right? Kitniot, legumes, right? You can nullify in majority, we said, right? And it's allowed, even for Ashkenazim, it's allowed. So here also, right? If you nullify it, the chala, it's allowed. Why is that? Because it's only, right, of the diaspora, which is rabbinical. Okay. We said over there, Rabba mebatla berov, right? Rabba, that's what he would do, right? He would nullify it in the majority. V'achila bimei tumaton, and then he would eat it during his impure time. Hilkach yachol hu likrot la Hashem. So he says, therefore, he can call it chala, ulbatla, or he can designate it, and then nullify it, right? Ulafota, and then bake it. But the Ramban, he says, katav le'amid divrei arif. He says he supports the words of the Rif. The efshar dechi aminan mevatla berov, right? So it says because it's possible. Then when we say right that you can nullify the majority, hainu lomar she'im nitarva b'kmota, that means that if it got mixed with something which is has the same product, right? Same type, or b'pachot mimena, or less than that, marbe alea chulin. So then you can just nullify it with the mundane, right, food, umbasla, and then, right, to nullify like that. Like it says in the first paragraph of Betza, the bedrabanan mematlinan isura gavna. Says when it's a rabbinical prohibition, you're allowed to do this. You don't have to nullify it like that. But he says lechatchila, to nullify, right, the mixture. No, you cannot do that. The erev bashar isurin should divrehem en lanu. So he says when it comes to mixtures, right? We don't have other prohibitions, rabbinical prohibitions. So he says, right, you can bring, as we said, a Kohen who's a katan, and he never saw emission in his life. So he says, it implies from here that, when you have somebody who's katan, he's a child, we assume that he never had an emission, children don't usually get them. And he says, so therefore we believe him when he says he never saw, even though he's only 11 years old or 12, right? Or you bet. But Rabbeinu Yerucham Katav, he writes that he writes that if there's in the town, right, Kohen, Katan, who's Katan, Pachot mitesha shanim, less than 9 years, Shelo yatsa tuma migufo, and he never had impurity coming out of his body. Mashma midvarav implies from his words, Shem hu gadol yoter. If he's bigger than that, mi ben tesha are more than 9, are hu becheskat shirah keri. So then we assume that he did see, right, already emission after the age of 9. V'atam mishum dekaimalan, because we hold. Why is that, by the way? Why is 9 the threshold? The ben tesha biato biyah, because we hold, right, that a 9-year-old is already capable of intercourse. So if that's the case, right, then we assume that he can have an emission as well, obviously. Okay, the chala shniya necheret lekohen yafrishena v'yafena. So he says the second chala, which is eaten by the kohen, separate it and bake it. It says That's the language of the Torah. So says Bet Yosef, Ze al pi mash katab be'elchot halal. So that's according to what it says over here in this book. Im en kohen katan. You don't have kohen katan or kohen gadol or a big adult shetaval that immersed in the mikveh. Mafrish time echad leor ve'en la shiur. So this is what you do is um, you separate two, and one for the fire. In other words, you burn it, and it has no size. In other words, there's no minimal size there. Ve'echad coin, and one you give to coin, ve'esh la shiur, and that has a minimal size. Muter afilu lezavim uzavot. This is even allowed to for person who has right the zav, zavot, which is also types of emissions out of the body. Venidot ve'elodot, and also nidot, right? One who's menstruating, a woman, and also one who gave birth. Vena asura ela lezarin, and it's only forbidden to write non-kohen, Jewish people who are not kohen. Ad kan hashana. Aval kvar katav sham, but he says he already wrote there. Sheyesh omrim, that some say she'en tzarich lafrish ela chalat ha'ur bilvad. You only have to separate, just the challah for the fire, right, for the burning. He says now the custom is like that, right? We only do one, we don't do two. So as I saw, there's one, who used to separate two chalot for Pesach. So it says there's no reason for that. Why would you want to do two, right? What's the purpose of that? The Ma'ashana Pesach, Mishayim Shana. What's the difference between Passover, right, and the rest of the year, right? Manishtana halayla zeh, right? What difference does it make? This night or the other night, it's all the same. Right? So v'yesh me'agaonim shekatvu. So it says there are some gaonim that wrote in Sharet Tshuva, it's put down she'av chalat ha'ur yachol likrot la Hashem. So it says even the chalat, what you burn, you can call it, the name, ulafota, and designate it, and then bake it up in makom she'en sham kohen, even though there's no kohen there. Ken katav Mordechai. That's what it says in Mordechai Perek Elu this Perek. V'agot Maimon katvu, and says Agot Maimon, which is a commentary on the Rambam. Perek Gimel Minchot Yom Tov, right over there. B'makom she'en kohen kalal, the place where there's no kohen at all. Be'ir, right, in the town, Yaseh kakatuv be'amud mutar letaltela. So he says, right, that you should do like it's written in the column, whatever, I don't know, and it's allowed to carry it. Afilu le'achar kriyat Hashem, even after you already designated it. K'de'amar be'gemara, like it says in the Gemara, Shabbat kuf chat vav amud bet, metaltelin et haluf. So it says you're allowed to carry, right, this food which is called lof. Right? Why is that? Because you can feed it to the ravens, right? It's food for the ravens. Even somebody who doesn't have any ravens, but since it's fit for somebody who does have ravens, right? The chen zar, right, also, right, mutar, also to a person who's not a kohen, it's allowed. The taltel truma mishum is you're allowed to carry truma, even though you're not a kohen. Mishum dechazia lekohen, because it's fitting for a kohen. Afilu b'makom she'en kohen, even in a place where there's no kohen. Ve'od, right? He says furthermore, kiman de mutar letaltela b'shat. Since you're allowed to carry it at the time of kriyat Shem when you designate it, mutar letaltela achar kach kodem she'nechana la'aretz. You're also allowed to carry it afterwards before you place it on the ground. Ad makom she'yutzeh, until the place that you want, whatever. Kemo bedavar shetzarich limkomo, like something which needs, right, to designate a place. The whole Eluhem divrei samag. So this is all from the words of the samag. Be'ilchot Yom Tov, laws of Yom Tov. The Sefer HaTumah be'ilchot chala, and also there. Umiyu mash katav shemetaltelin et haluf. That what you said, right? We can carry this food, right, for ravens. Afa pi she'en lo orovim, even though he doesn't have any ravens to feed. Eno muskam, right? It's not really. He says not everybody agrees with this. It's a machloket, right? Ukvar katavti the siman shinchet. He says I already wrote in this chapter, which is 308. Okay. Umiu says, however, mash katav shemitavtilin talof. That what he says, right? That we can carry this loaf. Afa pi she'en lo oravim, even though he has no ravens. אינו מוסכם, וכבר כתבתי בסימן ש"ח, this is not agreed to, I'm rereading this right, by mistake. So he says, I already wrote in the chapter 308, שיש אוסרים, that some forbid this. אלא אם כן יש לו עורבים, unless he has ravens, actually, right? Some only allow when you have ravens. Okay. By the way, the halacha is not like that. The halacha is that even if you don't have ravens, you can still carry it. Okay. Im shachach velo ifrish chala. So it says if he forgot and didn't separate chala me'erev Yom Tov right on the eve of Yom Tov, kitzad yaseh. What should he do? Echto b'sof siman tav kuvav. Says I'm going to write this in right the end of chapter 506. There you go. Okay, very good. So we're done with Bet Yosef. Let's go Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, so it says in Shulchan Aruch, this is Bet, Halash Isa B'Yom Tov Shel Pesach, right? Let's say he right, needed a dough on the Yom Tov of Pesach. So he's actually doing it on Yom Tov itself, right? Not before. Lo ikra Hashem lechala ad sheteafeh. So in a case like that, right, don't call it chala until you bake it. Okay, why is that? She'im ikra la Hashem eno rasha lefota. Because if he calls it already chala, he's not going to be able to bake it anymore. Why is that, by the way? Because it's muktzah, right? Since it's not usable, that challah has no use. Because what do we do with that? Well, we burn it, right? So, since it has no use, so therefore, right, we don't give it to the Kohen today. So therefore, right, you shouldn't call it the name. Why? Because once you do, you can't move it anymore. So how are you going to bake it, right? How are you going to eat it like that, right? It's going to be a problem. So, right, also, you can't just leave it like that because it'll get leavened. So therefore, that's also not an option. Veno rashai lesarfah b'yom tov. And also, right, don't tell me you're gonna burn it because on Yom Tov you can't burn it either. By the way, why can't you burn it on Yom Tov? Aren't you allowed to cook on Yom Tov? So why can't you burn it? I'm testing you guys if you're on the ball or not. Okay, okay, I'll tell you. Right, so it says right. The reason why you can't burn it is because you don't need to eat it, right? You're only allowed to burn something on Yom Tov, to cook something which you need to eat, but this you're throwing it away. So since there's no use for it, you're not allowed to burn it. That's the whole thing, right? And we also said another thing, right, in Bet Yosef. We said that the other reason you can't burn it is because it's holy, right? And you can't burn holy stuff on Yom Tov. So we have prohibitions here. So therefore, right, since all your options are right exhausted here, more or less, right, the only other option you have is to bake it, and then separate the challah. And that'll work out good for you. So let's see, right, how that works. So it says, right, Ve'im shachach v'kara Hashem. But if he forgot, right, let's say, and he called it challah, he made a mistake, right? In other words, we told him not to do this before baking, right? But he did it. So what should you do? So he says, right, what's your solution? As we said in the Bit Yosef, you put it in cold water, right? This way the cold water won't let it leaven. Right? So nowadays, right, what would you want to do? Put it in cold water and place it in the fridge, right? This way it'll stay cold, right? That's it. Yeah. This way, you won't have a problem. So we see from here, by the way, an important rule, which is that cold water doesn't really leaven. Okay, interesting. So But you still have to be careful about that. We try to be careful about it. ואם שכח וקרא להשם, right? So it says the Rama, אם יש כהן קטן שלא ראה קרי. So it says if you have a small kohen, right, a child who didn't see Kerry in that place, right, in that town, or gadol, or you have an adult, um, shetaval lekiryo, right, that went to the mikveh, right, and purified himself. Mutarim leafot achala bishvilo, so they can bake the challah for him. So then it will be allowed, right? ויש אומרים שאין מאכילים לחלה בזמן הזה לשום כהן. So he says, but there's also another opinion which says, right, that you can't give challah nowadays to any kohen. Uh, and that's, by the way, that's the way we do it today. We don't give it to any kohen. We just throw it away, right? We burn it, throw it away. יש אומרים דמותר לו ביום טוב ללוש פחות מכשיעור. But it says there is another opinion, right, which says that you're allowed to need on Yom Tov, right, a size which doesn't need challah, כדי לפטור עצמו מן החלה, in order to absolve it, right? So that's also another option, right, which is that, just make your loaves, make your dough small, that it shouldn't be 3.5 pounds, right? And this way it won't be obligated to have challah. So, you can just make small matzot, small, right? Like we do today, right? All the matzot that we make today are all small, relatively speaking, they're all small. So because of that, you're not going to separate challah, right? If you make small dough like that, each one separately, without combining them, whatever. So if that's the case, right, then you won't have any problems because you don't need to separate challah. So, just go about your business, business as usual, right? That's it. That's another option. So why is he telling you this, right? It's pretty obvious. I mean, obviously, if you make the loaves smaller, obviously, right? What do you call it, right? You don't have to do challah. What's the chidush? So the answer is that usually, right, we tell you don't do this, like on purpose, to make them small in order to absolve it from challah. But here on Passover, since it's not very, right, comfortable for you to do this, to have challah problem, as we just mentioned, right? There's a problem here. You can't burn it. You can't do this. You can't do that. You have no options, more or less, right? Your options are very few. So therefore, in a case like that, where you're in, when you're right in a ditch, right? You're up against you're up against the wall. So then you can, right? You can make use, right, of this solution, which is to make them small. And then it's absolved from challah. There you go, right? So nothing can be better than that. There you go. Or as we said, right, the other solution is that if you, right, want to make a large loaf, whatever, or a large dough, and therefore you are obligated in challah, so then what you do is you wait till you bake it, right, and then separate. That's the other solution. This way, you won't have an issue with right, with leavening and all the other things, right, that we mentioned. Okay, good. So yeah, I think that's the end of the chapter. If you have any questions, let me know. So let's yeah, so let's look at the next chapter to see how big it is. If we can start it now, or should we wait till next time? We'll see. Let's take a look. Yeah. It's also relatively a small chapter. So it says here, right in the Torah, next chapter, אין מתחילים להתעסק בפת בי"ד עד אחר ו' שעות. והיית בתשובת מעשה באחד שאפה מצות קודם ד' שעות, וכבר ביאר חמצו ועשו רבותינו חמצה, המצה, תאית קש לפסח, וכיוון דפסח אינו נשחט אלא מו' שעות ומעלה, אף מצה כן. Oh, right, so here, interesting thing he tells you, right, the Torah, that if you're gonna bake matzot, right, on the eve of Passover, right, the eve of Passover, which is before, before nightfall, right, before sunset, whatever. So uh, he says you shouldn't do that until the sixth hour, right? Meaning what? After midday, right? You should wait till midday. Nowadays, right, in our area here in New York City, midday is about 12, 10, 10 minutes after 12, right? Every area is different. You got to check your local calendar, right? To see what's going on there. So, um, and so what we're saying is, right, don't start to make the matzot until midday. So, what's the reason why? So he says, right, that there's a tshuva written about this, a response, whatever, that there was one person who baked the matzot before the fourth hour of the morning, right, on erev Passover, right, the eve of Passover, ukvar bi'erach himtzo, and he already destroyed his chametz right at that time. He says the rabbis forbade the matzah that he'd made. Why is that? Because it's right, it's juxtaposed to Pesach, the Korban Pesach, right? The Pesach sacrifice. So it says since the Pesach sacrifice is only slaughtered after midday, so the same thing also applies to the matzah as well, right? Since they're juxtaposed to each other. So in other words, he's telling you, right, that therefore the proper thing to do on the eve of Passover is to wait till midday and then to make the matzot then. And by the way, this is a custom amongst pious Jews, right? In Eretz Israel, I don't know if anybody does it over here in America. Probably there's a few that do it. But in Israel, it's very common, amongst the pious people, the very super super ultra orthodox, ultra religious people, that they do this. They make the matzot for the seder, right? The eve of Passover after midday. Exactly what we're saying over here. According to Kabbalah, by the way, there's a big thing about that, that it's a proper way to do it for the Seder, to make it on the eve of Passover after midday. I guess we'll talk about that, later on, whatever. Hopefully, we'll see what happens, right? We'll see where we go. I'm not sure. So it says, right, that it's brought down in other books, this custom. So about Rabbi Eliezer, but he says, but Rabbi Eliezer Gadol, right? There's another opinion, right? He was one of the big rabbis of the Talmud, of the Mishnah, but Rabbi Shmuel HaKohen, right? Also this one, Rabbi, Hitiru ach af lechatchila, they allowed even lechatchila, right, to do before the sixth hour. So, right, there's a dispute about this in the Talmud, whether you're allowed to do, before the sixth hour or not. Okay. Ach lechatchila yesh lizaher mishum chaviva mitzvah b'shata. But he says lechatchila you should be, try to be stringent about this. What does that mean? To wait until midday. Avi Ezri Havi Tosefta, right? So it says Avi Ezri. Okay, that's already something else. Let's see a bit Yosef how much we got here. Yeah, so this is a long one, and I think it's only one. So we'll probably leave this off for the next time. Bezat Hashem, it seems like it's a short chapter. We can maybe finish it tomorrow. Hopefully, B'nai Neder. Bezrat Hashem. So we'll leave this for tomorrow, which is Thursday, right? We have one more day of the week, and Bezrat Hashem, and then we'll continue next week after that. So thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness, and Hashem should bless you to have good matzot, nice soft hot matzot, for the Seder night is especially, right? The soft ones, pita, like a pita, like the Sephardi make. That's the good stuff, it doesn't hurt your stomach also. It doesn't give you a stomach ache. So, oh yeah, hopefully you're gonna get that, right? You should order in advance, right? Or bake it in your house, whatever you want to do, right? One or the other. Okay, we'll talk about that. But we still have time. We have another 2 months before Passover. So we're still ahead of the game, more or less, right? Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Kavod Tarav, thank you so much.
All the best.